My name is Audrey, and the slow, deliberate dissolution of my 10-year marriage began with the quiet ping of an email on what was an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office, a room I loved, with a large bay window that looked out over the serene, tree-lined streets of Lincoln Park, Chicago. The room, much like our entire brownstone, was a carefully constructed testament to a decade of shared ambition and success, a world of muted earth tones, clean architectural lines, and the peaceful hum of a life well lived. The email was a credit card alert, a notification so mundane that my finger hovered over the delete button. But the amount made me pause $5,000. The vendor was a name I didn't recognize, a bespoke tailor on the Gold Coast with an elegant old-world name, a cold, sharp feeling, entirely out of place in my sun-drenched sanctuary, pricked at the edges of my focus. I ran a silent, automatic cross-reference in my mind. Ryan was supposed to be in Wicker Park, miles and a world away, enjoying his standing first Tuesday of the month beer with old college friends. He was a man of comfortable routines and well-made, but never ostentatious, clothing, a $5,000 suit, unmentioned and purchased from a neighborhood he always claimed was too pretentious, was more than just an anomaly. It was a discordant note in the symphony of the man I thought I knew. For a few minutes, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a gift for a client, a surprise for me, an error. But no scenario I invented could quiet the insistent, digital fact of the charge, a silent contradiction to the warm, familiar story of our shared life. A few days later, over a dinner of pan-seared salmon and roasted asparagus that I had perfected over the years, Ryan first brought up his ex-wife, Sloane. He did it with practiced ease, refilling my glass of Sancerre as he spoke, his voice carrying that smooth, persuasive charm that had always been his most potent tool. He told me Sloane had returned to Chicago after years in Berlin, that she was launching a contemporary art gallery in the West Loop, but was feeling utterly overwhelmed and disconnected from the city's current scene. He painted a picture of a woman adrift, an artist struggling with the pragmatic realities of business. He said she needed help, a guide to navigate the city's complex network of patrons and influencers. As her oldest friend, he felt a certain responsibility to help her, to be her anchor. He framed it as an act of mature, evolved friendship, a testament to the unshakable security of our own marriage. He suggested spending some time with her on the weekends, just for a month or two, to help her find her footing. A flicker of primal unease, an instinct I had learned to ignore in favor of logic and trust, stirred within me. But I silenced it. I wanted to be the modern, confident wife, the partner so secure in her relationship that she wasn't threatened by a ghost from a past that predated her. So I smiled, picked up my wine glass, and told him it sounded like a kind and generous thing to do. I chose to trust him, because for 10 years, trusting Ryan had been as natural and necessary as breathing. I didn't understand then that I was simply giving him permission to build a new world, one where I was not invited. The first true alarm bell, the one that pierced through my determined trust, rang a few weeks later. We were dressing for a charity gala at the Art Institute, a cornerstone event in our social calendar. I was in our walk-in closet, fastening the delicate clasp of a pearl necklace. When Ryan entered, his focus wasn't on me, but on the antique mahogany box on my dresser, the one where I kept my most treasured heirlooms. He opened it with a reverence that felt performative and lifted out the vintage Patek Philippe watch that had belonged to my father. It was a beautiful, understated timepiece from the 1950s, a symbol of the quiet integrity my father embodied. I rarely wore it. It was a legacy I was saving, a piece of him I intended to give to a future son. Ryan held it in his palm, the warm gold catching the light from the chandelier. "Audrey," he began, his voice a soft, careful caress, "I have a strange, and rather significant, favor to ask." He explained that Sloane was meeting a major potential investor that weekend, a reclusive billionaire who could single-handedly fund her entire gallery for the next 5 years. "She's terrified," Ryan continued, his eyes earnest. "I'll be there to support her, to talk business while she talks art. It's crucial we make the right impression, for her sake." Could I possibly borrow this? The question hung in the air between us. Heavy and cold. He wanted to wear my father's memory on his wrist, not as a symbol of our family or our future, but as a prop in the theater of his ex-wife's success, the line between kindness and betrayal, once a clear and bright demarcation, had suddenly dissolved into a terrifying, murky gray. I heard myself say yes. The word felt foreign, a betrayal of myself and my father's memory, but it escaped before I could stop it. I watched him fasten the worn leather strap around his wrist, a strap that still held the faint shape of my father's own. It felt like a small, private treason, a concession I would later replay in my mind 1,000 times, the following weekend, while he was out making the right impression. I found myself scrolling aimlessly through my phone, a nervous habit I developed. A local art blogger I followed had posted a series of stories from a gallery opening in a trendy, new space in the background of one video, amidst a sea of chic, black-clad figures. I saw him. Ryan was laughing, his head tilted back in a way that signaled pure, uninhibited joy. Beside him, Sloane was looking up at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something far more intimate, and on his wrist, catching the sharp, dramatic light of the gallery, was my father's watch. There was no sign of a tense business meeting. There was no reclusive billionaire in sight. This was a celebration, a triumphant debut, a performance of a life he was living without me, accessorized with the most sacred piece of my past. My finger trembled as I took a screenshot. The clinical action a stark contrast to the hot, messy jealousy that was finally be boiling over my carefully constructed composure. That photograph became my first piece of concrete evidence, the first document in a case file I never wanted to open. From that day forward, I lived a double life, to the world and to Ryan. I was the same Audrey, a focused executive, a loving wife, a calm and steady partner, but in the quiet moments alone. I became a detective in my own home, watching the man I loved from behind a one-way mirror of feigned normalcy. The weekend meetings with Sloane became a fixture, an unmovable, non-negotiable part of our schedule. His explanations for his absences grew more detailed, more elaborate, as if the sheer volume of words could mask the growing emptiness of his commitment to me. He started caring about his appearance in a way I hadn't seen since we were first dating. New colognes, with sharp, woody notes I didn't recognize, would appear on his dresser. Expensive designer jeans and cashmere sweaters replaced his usual weekend attire. He was curating a version of himself for her, a more sophisticated, more artistic man. I was left with the comfortable, predictable husband who, I was beginning to realize, was merely a role he played from Monday to Friday. My first concrete step into the investigation was to examine our financial data, my native language. The constant drip of small lies and odd expenses fueled a cold resolve. As a fintech executive, my entire career was built on analyzing complex data sets, on finding the truth hidden in the numbers. I decided to apply that same dispassionate logic to my marriage. The recurring, unexplained Uber charges were my entry point. It wasn't about the money. It was about the data trail. One night, after Ryan was sound asleep, the steady rhythm of his breathing a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of my own heart, I sat in my office and logged into our shared account. I began to comb through the trip history, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It was meticulous, tedious work, but I was relentless. And then I found it. A pattern. Clear as day. Every Saturday for the past 3 months. A trip that started near our house and ended at the Serafina, a discreet boutique hotel downtown known for its dark, intimate bar. Another trip would be logged from the same location 4 or 5 hours later. It was never the West Loop Art Gallery. It was never a suburban art fair. It was always the Serafina. The digital receipts were a cold, hard ledger of his deceit. each one a small nail in the coffin of the trust I had so freely given him for a decade. The discovery of the hotel trips led me to a darker, more terrifying place. A man who lied so systematically about his time was certainly lying about his money. I began a discreet financial audit of our lives. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, our joint tax preparation folder. As I was gathering documents for our accountant, I found a Form 1099 INT reporting interest income from a bank I didn't recognize. It was a small amount, easily overlooked. But it was attached to an account number that wasn't on our list of shared assets. It was a thread, and I knew I had to pull it. It took another week of careful, discreet work, using the access granted to me as his wife on our tax filings to request further documentation from the bank. When the official statement finally arrived in a sealed envelope, my hands were shaking. I saw the familiar pattern of small, regular transfers from our main savings account. But it was one large transaction, a single line item from 3 months ago. That made the air leave my lungs. A wire transfer for $50,000. The recipient was an LLC I'd never heard of, Lakeshore Designs. The memo line contained just 3 words, Lake Michigan Deposit. The world tilted. The lake house. It was our most cherished dream, the one we'd sketched on restaurant napkins during our honeymoon. It was the place we promised we would build for our future children. Our someday plan, the ultimate symbol of a shared life. And he had been building it, secretly, with our money, for a life that clearly no longer included me. The name of the LLC was the final, brutal twist. It was a place for someone else's future, built on the foundations of our stolen dream and funded by our shared past. That was the moment the grief hardened into glacial resolve. It was the moment I stopped thinking about saving my marriage and started planning my own future. The very next day, a formal email from my company's head office in London appeared in my inbox. It was the 3rd time they had offered me the position of Director of European Operations. This time, I didn't hesitate. I replied and scheduled a confidential video call. I spoke to the Chief Executive Officer, my voice even and steady as I discussed the parameters of the offer. I was no longer a wife clinging to a dying marriage. I was a businesswoman negotiating the terms of my own liberation. We ended the call with a mutual understanding they would send a final, official offer in writing, and I would give them my decision by the end of the week. I was building my escape route, brick by careful brick. The final confrontation happened on the Saturday of our 10th anniversary weekend. I had known for weeks that he would forget, but the quiet reality of it was still a dull, persistent ache. There was no card, no flowers, just Ryan, meticulously dressed in an expensive new sweater, getting ready to leave. "Sloan is in a major crisis with a difficult artist," he said, adjusting his watch. "I have to go help her." "Don't go, Ryan," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "Stay. Let's talk." He looked at me with genuine irritation, as if my request was an unreasonable imposition. "Audrey, I can't just abandon her," he said. The word abandon, a sharp, ironic barb. He had been abandoning me, piece by piece, for half a year. That was when he delivered the ultimatum he thought would silence me. "Look," he said, his voice cold. "Sloan is my friend. If you can't trust me enough to accept that, then maybe this marriage isn't as strong as we thought." He expected tears. He expected a fight. He did not expect my response. I held his gaze, a profound sense of calm settling over me. In my inbox, the signed London offer was waiting, a tangible promise of a different life. He thought he was holding all the cards, but I had an ace he didn't even know was in the game. "You're right, Ryan," I said, my voice clear and even. "It isn't." The shock on his face was immediate. His confident stance crumbled, replaced by a flicker of panic. "Wait, Audrey, that's not what I meant," he stammered. I held up a hand. "No, you were perfectly clear." I said, "And now, so am I." I walked past him into my office, opened my laptop, and formally accepted the position in London. I then called our real estate agent and told her to prepare the listing for our house. I had the legal right. My inheritance had provided the down payment, a fact documented in our prenuptial agreement. When I returned to the living room, Ryan was pale. "You can't just sell our house." I looked at him, the man who had become a stranger. "I know about the separate bank account." "Ryan," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "And I know about the $50,000 deposit you made to Lakeshore Designs." The mention of the specific transaction, the cold data, hit him harder than any accusation of infidelity ever could. I hadn't just discovered his affair, I had uncovered his financial treason. The 3 weeks that followed were an exercise in organized dismantling. While Ryan moved through the house in a daze, I operated with the efficiency of a CEO managing a complex divestiture. Lawyers were engaged, accounts were separated, and our beautiful brownstone, the symbol of our life, was filled with the quiet bustle of stagers and photographers. He tried to argue, to negotiate, but I met his emotional appeals with cold, hard facts. The narrative was no longer his to control. My new life in London began with the gentle bump of a plane landing at Heathrow. The city was vast, energetic, and wonderfully anonymous. My company had arranged a sleek, modern flat in Notting Hill. As I stood looking out over the rain-slicked streets, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing for so long. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for months was gone, replaced by a quiet, thrilling sense of possibility. Work was a welcome, all-consuming challenge. I dove into my new role, building a team, crafting strategies, and finding a deep, satisfying joy in my own competence. I was good at my job, and for the first time in years, my professional success wasn't just one half of a power couple's resume, it was entirely my own. About 6 months after I moved, I received an update from a former colleague. The art gallery had failed spectacularly. Ryan, it turned out, was facing legal troubles for his illicit use of marital assets. Sloan, my colleague added, had quietly moved on. He had lost everything: the wife, the house, the money, and the other woman. That evening, I was at a rooftop bar with my team, celebrating a major success. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unsaved number, but I knew who it was. "What are you doing this weekend?" Ryan had written. I looked at my new friends, at the glittering London skyline, at the life I had built from the ashes of the one he had burned down. I leaned in close to my smiling team and took a selfie. I sent the photo to him with a simple caption, "Running my European division, you." Then, before he could reply, I blocked his number. And for the final act of my liberation, I opened my cloud storage and deleted the file with the bank statement forever. I didn't need the evidence anymore. I was my own proof.